Hello, I'm Annette Young and welcome to the 51%, a show about women reshaping our world. Coming up, France and Germany come under fire for failing to decide on a legal definition of rape, which could mean the European Union's first ever directive on violence against women will not include the crime. Pressure is now on both countries to reconsider their stance. Also, rethinking our history or her story. I'll be talking to author and journalist Annabelle Hirsch about her new book, A History of Women in 101 Objects. And as Paris prepares for the Olympics this coming July, a look back at the last Paris Games in 1924 and the female athletes who took part. But first, every year, more than 100,000 rapes are recorded throughout the European Union, and only 1 in 200 of these lead to actual convictions. Yet today, member states have been unable to agree on including the crime of rape in their first ever directive on violence against women. France and Germany in particular have come under fire for blocking its inclusion, partly because they don't agree on a non-consensual definition of the crime. Emerald Maxwell has more.
It's supposed to be a law to better protect women across the European Union. The European Directive on Violence Against Women has hit a stumbling block. Countries have agreed to include bans on forced marriages, female genital mutilation, sexual harassment and forced sterilisation, but not on rape. This despite the fact that the European Council estimates that more than half of all women in Europe have been sexually harassed, and only 1 in 200 rape cases leads to a conviction.
It's clearly a sign to men all around the union that there is actually a horrific crime you can conduct and there will be impunity linked to it.
MEP and co-rapporteur on the directive, Evan Insir, criticised France and Germany for aligning with countries like Hungary to block the inclusion of rape.
It's a big shame that we have 2 liberal men, President Macron in France and Minister of Justice Buschmann in Germany, together with an illiberal man, Orban in Hungary, that are constituting and having a blocking minority in the council.
Part of the problem is that the 27 countries cannot agree on a definition of the crime. Currently, 16 member states, including Belgium, define rape as non-consensual sex. But others, like France, make no mention of consent, defining it rather as sex acts committed with the use of force.
A group of countries, including France, are refusing to include the concept of consent in their definition at national level because they consider that their existing legislation is effective enough as it stands.
But all hope is not lost yet. For the directive to include rape, just 1 more country needs to come on board. With negotiations still ongoing, France and Germany still have time to change their stance.
So, why is it history as opposed to her story? Mainly because it was men and their objects that caught the attention in the past of predominantly male historians. But author and journalist Annabelle Hirsch has corrected our not-so-perfect 2020 rear vision by writing a book entitled A History of Women in 101 Objects. In a highly humorous fashion, she's focused on objects that symbolise the quiet ways in which women fought for independence and against their allotted roles as wives, mothers and daughters. And I'm delighted to say that Annabelle joins me in the studio today. Annabelle, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
What made you decide to write the book?
Well, maybe what you just said, that I had the feeling that the history of women is told a bit in the last years, but it's very often told in this idea that we try to, tell the history of the 100 cool, the 100 powerful, the 100 exceptional women, but that it's very difficult to find a history of women which shows how it really was to be a woman in the past. And so I really wanted to try to tell this story of women that had been victims, but also that had been powerful, as we know. And I realized that it's very easy and very nice to do it through objects because you can talk about the very intimate space, but also about the political and the public space.
And of course, Annabelle, you're talking about what one might say are rather mundane objects, but in fact they carry very important stories and hold a lot of resonance. And I'm going to start with the first image, or one of the first images that come up in the book, and that, of course, is the one of the healed femur bone.
Yes.
A lot of people wouldn't understand the significance of that, would they?
Probably not, but I think it's very interesting because it relates to a story that is very widely known in a way. It's Margaret Mead, the anthropologist. She was in the 60s in the USA. She was in a university, and she got asked what would be the first object that could represent the start of our civilization. And we expect that this person was thinking about, I don't know, an armor or something like that, something that man invented. And she said, no, it's a healed femur. And she explained it, saying that in nature, if an animal breaks a leg, they wouldn't survive, obviously. And that the fact that a human had survived this broken leg shows that someone was there to care for him or for her. And so she doesn't say that this was a woman, right? But she says that, in fact, what makes us so strong and what makes us so superior in a way, if we want to think that, as a species, is that we care for others. And I really like this to show that this is a starting point, how you could tell history, well, actually in a different way, saying that what we think is important, like doing wars, being very powerful and also violent, is maybe a weird way to tell history, and that we can also find another path to tell it.
Now, the next one is a personal favourite, and that's the pocket.
Yes.
The dress pocket, because so many of us as women are constantly searching for dresses and skirts that have pockets. And as you write, the scope of freedom is directly proportional to the number of one's pockets. Isn't that the case?
Yeah, it is. Actually, I didn't realize that before I started to research for this book. And this particular pocket is in London at the Royal Albert Museum, I think. And so there was a real fight in the 19th century for the pockets. The suffragettes they had a suffragette suit which was full of pockets, I think like 60 pockets, because having pockets in your clothes is a way to be, to be able to move, right? So this pocket was run from the 17th century when men started to have pockets in their pants and in their jackets, and women started to wear these, which were kind of handy because they were very big, so you could put a lot of stuff in there. But then also, you have all those pockets that you would have around your skirt, so it's not very handy. You cannot really move very freely. And so it tells a lot about the way, well, women were always kept to be, in a way, undynamic, unmovable, that they didn't have like the freedom to just go away, have the stuff on them and do whatever they want.
And now at the end of the book are two contemporary items, aren't there, Annabelle? One being the pussy hat, which featured during the Women's March in Washington in 2017 against Donald Trump. And then you've got a braid of hair, which is effectively commemorating those women who cut off their hair in protest at the death of Mahsa Amini in Iran, but also against the ongoing oppression of women in that country. A reminder of how the battle for women's rights continues still everywhere.
Absolutely. I think that the pussy hat really stands for this moment in 2017 when, with the election of Donald Trump just before, people realized that actually society doesn't care so much probably about how women are treated in a society. If you see how he talks and acts with women and that he's still elected as president. So this was really, to me, a turning point. And to everyone, I suppose, also with Me Too coming up in 2017. So the pussy hat was very important at that point. And then in 22, when in Iran, you had this rising, which was so amazing and so brave and like never seen before in this way. I really felt like this has to be the end, also because it's opening up to another cultural space. And because it's an open story in a way. I didn't want this book to be finished. I wanted to show that there's a breaking moment, but something is going to come afterwards. We don't know what it is, but it's changing.
Annabelle, thanks so much for your time. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Now, in the lead up to the Paris Olympics, the 51% will be airing a series of features on the Games with a distinct feminist twist. The last time the French capital hosted the Games, however, was 100 years ago in 1924, and it also marked the largest participation of female athletes since the start of the modern Olympics. But still, out of the 3,000 athletes, only 135 were indeed women. So which events did they compete in, and what were the games like back then? Claire Paquelin and Stephanie Trouard went to find out.
Women athletes were banned from the first modern Olympic Games in Athens in 1896. But 28 years later in Paris, they competed in tennis, swimming, and for the very first time, fencing. It was also the first time women were allowed to swim backstroke at the Olympics. In the 1912 and 1920 Games, they were only allowed to compete in freestyle races. The event took place at the Tourelle Pool, now called Georges Valery, in northern Paris, and was won by the American Sybil Bauer.
Swimming was a masculine domain. These women were pioneers in their events, and they contributed to promoting women athletes.
The exploits of women swimmers here has largely been forgotten. The pool is best known because Johnny Weissmuller, the future Tarzan on the big screen, won 4 medals here, 3 of which were gold.
It's true, we often remember certain Olympic gold medals, but here a significant number of women swimmers took part in Olympic events, and they too won medals.
The pool is being renovated for the 2024 Paris Games. This is where athletes taking part in the swimming marathon and triathlon will train. Back in 1924, women made up less than 5% of the total number of athletes. For the first time in Olympic history, in the Paris 2024 Games, women will make up 50%.
And that's it for now. We'd love to hear from you, so do reach out to us via Facebook, Instagram or X, of course, formerly known as Twitter. So until our next show, bye for now.
In 2016, Yahya Jammeh, the Gambia's president, was defeated at the polls after 22 years in power. But the terror unleashed by his government remains etched in people's memories.
The 22 years of Jammeh's regime or more was more or less of a very brutal regime where people's rights were trampled on.
Since the end of the dictatorship, numerous accusations against Jammeh and his militia have emerged.
The current government has promulgated certain laws that can try crimes of torture. I'm very hopeful that very soon we will have justice.
Watch Yahya Jammeh's The Gambia Revisited on France 24 and France24.com.